Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Florida Daily Show. I'm your host, Lindsay Randall, and I have our expert legal analyst with us. His name is Ron Davis. He's always on the radio with on the Ed Dean radio show, and we just have a great time talking. How's it going, Ron?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Today, we want to talk about a really interesting subject. I think is going to be revolutionary for just voter integrity in our state, and hopefully it'll be the blueprint around the country. But it's the new bill that the governor just signed into law on April Fool's Day, but it is not a joke and it is not foolery. From The Guardian, it says the title of this article is Florida and Mississippi governors sign proof of citizenship voting bills. And the article goes on to say how this will now require documented proof of citizenship to register to vote. And they're going to begin that process July 1st, it goes into effect. And it will eventually unenroll voters that have not provided citizenship documentation. What do you think?
I mean, with the current state, with the influx of 10, 20, 30 million, who knows how many illegal immigrants, I think that it's always a good move that we verify that people voting are who they say they are and that they're residents of the state. I mean, historically, we had problems decades ago where you'd had people from New York or otherwise voting up there and then coming down here and voting again. Technology is much different now. It's easier to track. It's much more feasible to do. So I think you have a historical problem, and then you compound that with an influx of the illegals, and it's a good move. It's a smart move.
What do you think about, I know that this just got signed into law. It's very, new. President Trump also is trying to push the Save America Act, which that would be similar, just doing it on a national stage. What do you think the likelihood of that will be to get passed?
Right now, it's tied up in the Senate. You would think that with even with the slim majority, there shouldn't be a problem getting through. I think the problem when you have the states doing it on their own, it makes it easier for the Senate to say, no, we don't have to worry about it. The problem is that you're going to have just the Republican states doing it, and then you won't have the problem states, which are, the California, the Oregons, the Illinois. They're not going to be required to do it. And it's not so much that the federal law requires the voter ID in as much as it requires that a database be checked to verify that, that the states can verify that the person is actually a citizen of the United States. So it's but all part of that is part and parcel having the ID. You need the states to do their own, I guess, laws or have their own rules that require some sort of ID to establish that the person says who they are.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about this just on the radio show, the Ed Dean radio show just this week, about the key to all of this is just voter integrity.
Yeah.
However, what the opponents say is this is racism, this is racism, this is racism. I don't understand how that can even be a thing. I mean, we checked, and to get your birth certificate, let's say it's destroyed by a fire or you lose it, to get a birth certificate reissued in the state of Florida, a certified copy, it costs $9 to $10. That's all. You can just do it online. You can request it, and it's easy peasy. If you want an additional one, it's $4 to $10 more to get other certified copies. So this, to me, it's like it's a no-brainer. It's easy. I think that the unenrolling voters is a really interesting take.
Yeah.
But I think it's necessary, because that's how we're going to make sure that only registered voters that are legitimate voters who are American citizens who are of age should be voting. And that is being compliant with the law. When did the law, I mean, I don't understand why this is so controversial, besides the fact that the left does not want to, they don't want to ensure this election integrity, because they want to do whatever they want to do and keep using their tactics, like, I don't know, dead people voting all the time.
Yeah, it's frustrating because if you look at the demographics, if you look at the polling numbers, and I'm not a huge fan of polling numbers, but they remain consistent over time. Majority of blacks are not opposed to voter ID. Hispanics are not opposed to it, and in fact, it's not so much as they're not opposed; they support it. We're talking 70 and 80% of all the different demographics are in support of voter ID. It's been interesting too to watch how the Democrats have morphed on this issue. They always their fallback is always racism, right? It's just when they don't have a logical explanation, they just scream racism, and that seems to carry them with that demographic. But I think what started happening is you started having these man on the streets interviews, and you would have them questioning black people based on white liberals' questions. Do you know where do you know where to go get a driver's license? Well, yeah, I know where to go get a driver's license. Do you have one? Almost everybody that I've ever seen talk to, even in these forums where they ask you to raise your hands and not raise your hands about whether or not you have IDs, almost 100% of the people have IDs. Do you know how to get to the DMV? Yeah, it's right around, every question that liberals have posed that have tried to indicate that this was racism, at the end of the day, when the blacks are interviewed, they get back to the end and they get this real quizzical look on their face, like, who would say that we couldn't find it? Who would say that we couldn't pay for it? Who would say that we don't have it? And then at the end, they would almost always say, well, that's racist. and that's kind of so now they've kind of morphed away from that, and they still want, they have to invoke Jim Crow whenever they can. So they say, all right, well, now it's a poll tax because some people just can't afford a driver's license or a state ID. Well, if you're that destitute that you can't afford a driver's license, then you're probably on public assistance, which means you had to have a state ID anyway to get it. So every argument they have just absolutely falls flat on their face, but it makes no difference. They're going to constantly use racism as long as they can ride that horse. But, like I said, the poll numbers, what is it? Almost 80% of all Americans support voter ID. And when you combine that, it's probably taken in the context of what we saw during the Biden administration with so many illegals coming over. I think that people want people to vote, but they also want it to be fair. And even the Democrats have been screaming and yelling about fair elections. So, it'll be interesting, but I don't know. It's just frustrating that the best they can do is come up with racism.
Right. I mean, can't they think of a better argument for this? But they don't have an argument because it just makes sense. Yeah. There is no actual argument that makes any legitimate sense when it comes to this issue. 83% of Americans that were polled agree that there should be some sort of ID mandate to vote. That's a slam dunk. It reminds me of the boys and girls sports argument where the left just had no argument. And it was just such a huge issue. And they're going to lose on this if they keep pushing it. So let them push it. They don't learn. And, but what's interesting is a couple hours after the governor signs this, so on April Fool's Day, on April 1st, there was a group, a coalition of voting rights and civil rights organizations. They filed a lawsuit challenging the law, saying it's unconstitutional. So we have our own SAVE Act now. We just, House and the Senate voted for it. We have the governor just signed it into law. Hours later, I mean, these lawsuits were just waiting in the wings, like they were ready to pounce. Yeah. So what do you think the likelihood of this, challenge is going to be as far as, defeating this? Do you think that they have a chance?
Well, it's going to be like most everything that we see today. There's enough liberalism and activism on the bench, and there's enough judges right now that feel that their driving force is to defeat Trump's agenda, that there's going to be certain judges that are going to grant injunctions. There's going to be some foreign shopping going on where these lawsuits are filed. There'll be injunctions granted, and there'll be stays, and there'll be fights. Ultimately, by the time it works its way through the appellate courts, they'll be upheld. The laws are solid. They're they're not based on anything that's just pulled out of the thin air. They're not requiring special IDs. They're not requiring people to do anything extra than what they'd have to do to get an ID or a driver's license, to get benefits in the state of Florida, to drive in the state of Florida. I think the bigger problem where everybody's going to have is everybody's procrastinators, right? Everybody waits to the last minute to do anything. And that's really, I think, what they're talking about is, well, we want to go vote. We want to go show up that day and be able to vote. And it's too cumbersome to have to deal with getting a driver's license. Well, you know what? Do what everybody else has to do, or what everybody should be doing, thinking in advance, right? If you think there's going to be a problem, then get out and make sure you're properly registered before the primaries.
Right.
Get out and make sure that you've got whatever necessary documentation that you need in order to vote. If you think you need a birth certificate to prove your citizenship, then go ahead and start ordering it now. It's an easy process. We went over that this morning. You just talked about it, how easy it is to go down to Davis Street or any of the bureau places and request that. Now, there are some people that have name changes or whatever that may not match the birth certificate, but guess what? There's other documentation that you can get. Don't wait to the last minute. And you got to be suspicious of the Democrats when they're trying to protect those people who are doing this at the last minute and trying to shove it through.
Right. I mean, what are they? Why would you, if you have not planned out even the fact that you have, your correct voter registration, why should I be incentivized as someone who is also a fellow American who has their actual voting registration in hand? What's in it for the rest of Americans who, if you can't even do that, do you think that I'm going to trust you to vote in an election? Have you really thought about this? If you can't even go get a legit driver's license or order something online that takes 2 seconds and $10 to get this proven. So I don't know. It's really interesting. The Amy Keith from the Common Cause, she's the Florida executive director. She said in a press release, if this law stands, thousands of U.S. citizens will be removed from Florida voter rolls, blocking them from voting in the next presidential election if they can't afford specific documents.
You know what? Guess what? Then you can waive the fee for a driver's license if it was for the purpose of voting. There's so many easy fixes to that, and there's time.
Right. Well, I think that this is just mass hysteria. Yeah. It's trying to make fetch happen. It's not. This is a slam dunk for voter integrity. The ACLU, our favorite American Center for, I want to say Law and Justice, but that's not it. The ACLU's Voting Rights Project, they have one of their attorneys, Jonathan Topaz, says this law targets Florida's most vulnerable voters, Ron. Older Black voters who grew up in the Jim Crow South, naturalized citizens, transgender people, low-income voters, voters with disabilities, all in service of perpetuating the fact-free myth of widespread non-citizen registration and voting. Ron, again, they're trying to make something out of nothing. This is also just goes to mass hysteria. You throw in Jim Crow laws in any argument, and all of a sudden you don't have a leg to stand on because you don't want to be considered racist. I think it's ridiculous, and I agree. I think that this seems like this law is going to withstand the test of all these jokers out there that are trying to defeat it.
Yeah, I think the law is sound. You'll have your activist judges at the trial level that will think that they're fighting the good fight. It will go up on appeal. The appellate courts will uphold it. I just wish the Senate would get off their duff and do what they need to do. But
you're talking about the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, the U.S. Senate. I am a bit torn on that, right? Because the Constitution says that the manner and method in which you vote and you lay it is up to the states. And so I think that on the federal level, they have to be very careful. I think the way they're trying to thread that needle is just simply say, we want to make sure that you're citizens of the United States and we want to have a database that the states can check it against. I could be wrong on, the overriding, but it seems to me that's really the basis. I think that survives scrutiny. But of course, the left is, hysterics, and it's the worst thing that's ever happened. We heard that in Georgia, right? Jim Crow 2.0, and it was going to be devastating to the black community, and yet we had one of the highest black turnout votes in recorded history in Georgia. So it clearly is not. And you have to be suspicious, Lindsay, of any party that had tried to reduce voting standards. And what I'm talking about is also in Georgia, where they challenged the signature requirements on mail-in ballots and wanted the verification percentages. In other words, does the signature need to be 60% match what we have on file? They wanted to reduce those numbers clear down into the 40s. And you have to ask why. What would be the purpose of wanting to change signature verification percentages down so low? And obviously, it is to slide more votes through. Well, the question is, are those valid votes then? Where are those ballots coming from? Why was it so important for you to change that so it made it easier to get potentially fraudulent votes through?
Right. That's a very good question, Ron. While we're finishing up this really interesting conversation, I wanted to just point out what Republican Senator Erin Grahl, she's a wonderful senator from the great state of Florida. She said that this legislation strengthens accountability while also streamlining state systems to make it easier for Floridians to register to vote. And that, to me, it's a very simple way of saying this makes our voter integrity stronger. It makes the process easier. And we're going to make sure that people who should be voting are allowed to vote, and people who shouldn't be voting should not be voting. So, and this will really, I think, strengthen democracy in the long run.
Yeah, and the people who are voting are actually who they say they are.
Yes, exactly. To me, if you don't show up, if you go to the polls, I mean, I remember during COVID and everybody masked up, and I just wondered, how do you won't even let me take my mask down to show you who I am. So how do you know that I'm actually coming in, and how do you actually verify when you can't even see half of my face? And so that made me feel very uneasy just as a voter going into the polls that election. I can't imagine when there's no ID required at all. That is completely crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's so normal for me to go into my voting precinct when I vote live, and the first thing they ask for is my ID, and I give it to them, and they compare it to the checklist, and they say, "Are you still at the same address?" And so it's alien to me, the concept that you wouldn't show your ID, and I'm just suspect of any state or any entity that says that somehow that's inappropriate.
Mm. Well, very wise words indeed. Thank you, Ron Davis. We're really excited, I think, over this new legislation and the fact that the governor just signed it. I think this is great for the state of Florida, great for hopefully other states such as Mississippi that already did this on the same day, but other states will soon follow. What's crazy to me is there's only 4 in the whole country that have done this, and we're one of those 4. So thank you to our great leadership in the legislature as well for doing this. So anyways, final thoughts?
No, I'll be curious. It's going to be interesting from an intellectual or from the legal side of things to watch how these things go through the court systems. But I always enjoy that. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's going to go through and it'll be upheld. It may not be upheld in time for this election, but Florida doesn't have that issue right now anyway. So it's other states is where I'd like to see it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. We're going to be closing this time on the Florida Daily Show. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Ron Davis, our wonderful legal analyst, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me today.
And this was a fun conversation, great topic. But you can subscribe on the floridadaily.com and tune in next time when we talk about more interesting things, especially that are dealing with our wonderful state of Florida.